Today I want to talk about why MMORPG fans seem to be drawn to Warhammer 40k and whether or not it's something you should check out. Spoiler alert, yes, you totally should. Please do, right now. Well, no, watch this first, then we'll go do it. So let's get a couple things out of the way. What is Warhammer 40k in 30 seconds or less? It's a tabletop wargaming, miniature collecting, building, painting, reading, gaming hobby. It's everything. It's expanded so far beyond its original single tabletop game that it's hard to nail down in 30 seconds exactly what it is, which is sort of what we're going to get into today. So what is my own experience with this massive thing that we call Warhammer? Back in December of, I guess, 2021, I learned that Warhammer 40k, something that I'd first explored in middle school in like 8th grade, built a couple models, painted a few things, and couldn't quite figure out everything that was going on. Not only was that as a hobby, as a game, as a concept still around, it was thriving. It was having one of its most successful years ever following the pandemic of 2020. A lot of people were at home, and although that hurt the hobby in many ways, a lot of people were finding all sorts of hobby time and things to do to try and make that home time more exciting, and I think it drudged up a lot of interest in modeling and gaming and all the kind of fun things that we do with Warhammer. It was around this time that a lot of videos of Henry Cavill admitting on a bunch of interviews and things for, I think it was like Witcher, the Witcher TV show interviews, that Warhammer 40k was kind of his like guilty pleasure. It was this secret hobby that he loved, and for so long he'd been kind of embarrassed to admit his interest in. He'd loved it since he was a kid, which I think all of us can appreciate in the MMORPG space, having maybe a little bit of hesitancy to admit some of our hobbies to the general public sometimes. Not everybody's always super understanding about how much time we put into some of these things. I ended up watching a bunch of lore videos, was absolutely fascinated. I just couldn't stop. It was so deep. The more I watched, every lore video explaining about like how to jump into Warhammer 40k and like what are the main factions of Warhammer 40k, what are the characters that you need to pay attention to, what's going on, what are the different ways to play. Every one of those videos is like an hour long. I was like, how can there be this much to Warhammer? And I haven't even scratched the surface. I started listening to a bunch of short stories. I was trying to figure out, what factions drew my interest. I bought a starter set box that had Necrons and Space Marines in it, and I've never looked back. I've been absolutely obsessed. Since that moment, I've painted over 4,000 points of models across 4 armies. I have absolutely no staying power whatsoever. I am not a focused man. I've read dozens and dozens of books, many of which have been absolutely fantastic. The Caiaphas Cain books, I'm actually rereading again. They are so fun. And I've successfully played exactly 0 games of Warhammer 40k. That's not entirely true. I got some friends over, we got the rule books, I got the cards, and we were trying to figure out, we've done that twice. Neither time would I say that we've successfully played an actual game of Warhammer 40k. We have dipped our toes in, we've rolled some dice. It seems fun. Haven't been able to really make it all come together into a cohesive game. But why? What draws me to this, and what does it have to do with MMORPGs? As many MMORPG fans can appreciate, if you've had one of those games that just draws you in more than any other game you've ever played. For me, it was Final Fantasy XI. I've played it for years. I'm still playing it. I connect with that game in a way that I've never connected with any other MMO to date, or any other game, really. I mean, if we're talking about pure playtime, it crushes every other game I've ever touched. When games like that fall off in terms of public interest, the community starts to wane, there isn't really a replacement game. We've all experienced that, looking for the next big MMO that's going to topple the previous one in our mind that holds near and dear to our hearts. World of Warcraft for many, Final Fantasy XI, EverQuest, pick your poison. There's so many out there that passionately drew players in, and maybe they're still around, maybe they're not, maybe there's versions of it that still exist. Something will always be different when it's not in active development, and as we've seen with modern MMOs, sometimes even when they are still in active development, the game has shifted so much from what we remember, it's not even really the same game anymore. That's a different video. We might have had that discussion. I feel like we have. That leaves a very large hole in your fun hobbying space. You used to spend hours and hours on playing these MMOs, leveling new classes, jobs, earning new equipment, doing new dungeons, all the fun stuff that takes up so much time in such a fun, meaningful way. And all of a sudden, there's a gap. Warhammer 40k fills that gap for me in ways that I didn't realize it could. I didn't even necessarily realize I had those gaps in my general hobbying and enjoyment of games. And now that I know they're there, I'm actually more frustrated that games like Final Fantasy XI didn't do what Warhammer is doing. Because it grabs so many other elements of media and approach to the IP that if every game did that, it would never succeed. No, you couldn't. Not every game could do this because it would destroy. The market would be flooded with miniatures and tabletop games and books, and I just don't think there'd be room for it all. But I wish with all my being that my game, Final Fantasy XI, could have done this, and I could have experienced it in so many different ways. At its core, for me, what initially drew me into Warhammer 40k, before I understood the lore, before I understood the factions, I knew that there was a game. There is a game you can play, and it requires a significant amount of time investment to build up that initial army so you can put down enough pieces, enough points on the table to play a game of Warhammer 40k. This tickled a part of my brain that I didn't know was there. The part that in Final Fantasy XI says, hey, guess what? At 75, if you have a 75 summoner that is strong enough and with good enough gear and you've merited enough, you could go fight Kieran with a link shell that'll invite you to do it. The part of my brain that says, what a fun, distant goal. That sounds so amazing. This crazy battle someday that I'll have with Kieran, whether or not it ends up actually happening. The fact that it is a target way out in the distant future that I can meaningfully work towards now with a single level up, a single acquisition of gear, is one of the reasons I love MMOs. That is that is exactly Warhammer 40k. The second I finished my first model and I was like, all right, that's 25 points towards 2,000. That sounds daunting and terrifying, but at the same time, I was like, oh my God, I want to have that feeling so many more times. That is awesome. That feels so good to be making progress towards this far distant goal with tangible rewards for my efforts. And I can approach that target in different ways. I can do it in big chunks with vehicles that cost a lot of points. I can do it in tiny chunks with infantry, where it's just a little bit of points, but it's something I have to do. Maybe I say, you know what, I've got to progress horizontally, and I don't really need to use both these units, but I want to have options. So I'm going to build a set of Eldari Rangers for some ranged, sniping action, or some up-close infantry with some Wraith Guard. There's so much you can do to progress towards that ultimate goal. And my wife asked me recently, why are you so focused on making sure that you're still following the rules of the game and you're worrying about point values and stuff? Like, you've played twice ever, kind of. I was like, I know, but the fact that the game is out there as a distant goal is kind of the whole thing. It's why this is so fun. Which sounds kind of weird. I don't know. Maybe I should talk to somebody about that. Wonder what that says about me. And it brought back that same feeling of progression I used to get with MMOs. And part of the reason MMOs draw me in so much more than other video games is because a lot of other video games are about skill, or it's a single player experience that's tied to a save file. And it's not that there aren't tangible rewards for that, but if it's a skill-based game and you come back after having now played for a while and suddenly you kind of feel like you're stuck, it feels like you've lost all that progress when you were practicing and working hard. If it's a single player game, you play through, you beat it, and I've got that save file, but there's no online experience about that. Maybe trophies, but they never really drew me in the same way as like actually having a world that I'm in where people can see the equipment I'm wearing and see the tangible rewards in game of the progress I had to make over time in missions, quests, leveling. And I love that about it. Finishing a single model or a piece of terrain is leveling from to 13 in the dunes, and maybe that tank was my entire Quiffim experience, but it's still the same feeling of I've finished a chunk and now I'm on to the next chunk, and nobody can take away that progress from me. Well, I guess they can remove armies. They have done that in the past, but we're not going to sit here and bash on Games Workshop and their questionable policies. There's progress. I make progress. All right, so that's Warhammer 40k, the modeling, the hobbying. That's what draws me to that. But why Warhammer 40k? There's different ways to do modeling and hobbying. There's, if you're not as worried about the game, which we just talked about why I like the game, but there's not, there's Gunpla, there's one-page rules, even if I want to do miniatures, but maybe not 40k. What draws me to 40k specifically over and over again? And I think where it went from I am interested to I am hooked deeply was the vastness of what they have done with the Warhammer 40k IP and all the ways that you can experience it. I briefly touched on this at the start of the video, but there are books, video games, there's the modeling, there's building terrain, there's another crafting element to more of like a diorama effect of I'm trying to build out a table, which D&D players might have had experience with over the years. There's different types in universe of games. There's Warhammer 40k as a sole concept. There's Necromunda, which I just learned about a couple weeks ago and I'm super interested in. Probably want to talk about that more. There's Kill Team, which is more of like a skirmish-based small number of units instead of big whole armies. And these are just the tabletop games. There's audio dramas, obviously audiobooks for all the books that I listened, a lot of which the voice acting is actually fantastic. With Warhammer, I can wake up one day and say, like, you know what, I just kind of feel like reading today, and I'm still kind of in universe, and I'm expanding my view and understanding of this vast setting in a different context from different character perspectives, and just trying to get a bigger grasp on something that ultimately is intangible. It's too big because it's not just a single world. It is the entire, Milky Way galaxy, 40,000 years in the future. In a alternate timeline, there's too much. It's constantly evolving and changing through retcons and rewrites, both good and bad. There's different perspectives of characters on the same events, so who's right? Does it matter? It's all just ever flowing. The Caiaphas Cain books are all written in the perspective of sort of like a diary entry from his own perspective. So even the book acknowledges a lot of the times, like, take this, with a grain of salt. This is his perspective. He might be embellishing, which is cool. If I want to play video games, there's shooters. There's been a recent RPG. There's strategy games over the years, a lot of which have been really good. There are some really great games. And again, it's all just different ways to explore this universe, this setting, and it's become almost like a comfort space for me, which is kind of funny because the setting itself is so dreary, but it's almost great in that way, that it's like it's so awful that you find humor in like the smallest little funny things. I guess where I'm trying to go with that is like you just can keep diving deeper. There's just always more. You can always go further. And D&D kind of does the same thing. They have books, they have models, they have terrain, along with, this narrative experience where you create your own tabletop experience. I think the difference for me was I've never been a DM, so I wasn't trying to collect monsters, terrain, because I'm not crafting that experience for my players. I'm just one player, so I collect maybe a couple of the books that I'm interested in to understand my own character better, or just the setting, but that's as far as I took it. But what makes Warhammer truly special for me, I think, is that something that only MMOs and maybe D&D have done for me, is that it's truly uniquely my experience with this IP. It's big enough, it's massive enough, there's so much room for interpretation, and obviously the modeling and creation of it is truly personal, that it's an experience that can only be reflected as the experience that I've had. Very few things, very few games very few experiences are big enough to allow for that uniqueness. 10 people might play Final Fantasy XI and have entirely different experiences, depending on who they met, what was easy, what was hard, what jobs they started at, how lucky or unlucky they were with certain drops. Things that were huge gates for certain players, they were stuck there for weeks, and when they finally achieved it, it was incredible. Might have been nothing for somebody else who happened upon somebody who could help do it in 2 seconds. That's a small example of how the world, the people around you, the random events, the random nature of an MMO can change your own experience. But it truly does craft into something that was uniquely yours. Maybe you were on a week where there was an event drawing a lot of players to an area that you happened to have to do a quest in, and that made that quest very different than anybody else who'd ever done it, who normally would go to an empty zone to complete that. There's little things like that. It's just cool. D&D obviously is incredibly personal and unique. I mean, every DM is going to craft a different experience for their players. You're creating a story around a basis of background. You're forming characters and narratives from essentially nothing, and 2 groups that both start the same kind of campaign of goblins attacking Phandalin ultimately will probably have very different stories and experiences, sessions after that, if not, ultimately their entire campaign experience. But yeah, the way that I've experienced the lore, the stories I've chosen to read, the games I've chosen to play, all of it frames this backdrop of how I see Warhammer 40k as a whole, and that influences and affects everything that I experience moving forward. Every game is told from that lens. Every model I craft, every army I build is all built around that perception that I've cultivated. And I'm inserting myself into it too. I'm creating armies, characters, they're all uniquely mine. I'm painting them slightly different than anybody else. I focused more on certain elements. And someday, maybe those models will actually be involved in the game itself, which is an exciting concept. I guess what I'm trying to say is that few things outside of Final Fantasy XI encouraged me to really deep dive and find that there's more to it. And there's still so much more to see and do and learn, that I never run out of excitement of finding that next thing. When I lose motivation on a project, I can shift to another. I was working on my Black Templar army, and I got kind of tired of painting Black Templar Space Marines, which is kind of, like leveling Thief in Final Fantasy XI. And now I'm working on painting up my Eldar army, and that's me shifting to Summoner. Oh, I've grown a little tired of the 40k grind in general, these huge armies. I just don't feel like I'm making enough progress. Maybe I'll check out Necromunda, which is more about individual characters, small gangs, and maybe some more terrain. That's crafting, or leveling fishing or something. I don't know, the metaphor is kind of falling off here, but you get what I'm trying to say. But like Final Fantasy XI, there's this game at the end of the tunnel. There's large armies battling against each other, long nights of dice rolling that I may never actually see, but that never bothered me before. Knowing that there are people out there doing Sky, doing Dynamis, knowing that it's an event that is happening right now. There are people playing 40k right now. I'm not playing it, but others are. And at some point, I hope to get to a point where I can too. At first I thought this might be something that was unique to me, and it's like, oh, it just tickles the part of my brain that I really liked. But I was recently watching the Warhammer podcast. Definitely go check them out on YouTube. Love those guys. They put out some great content every week. One of their videos, they kind of casually in an offhand comment mentioned, they're like, yeah, we used to play Final Fantasy XI, and then we started playing Warhammer. And I was like, what? Final Fantasy XI fans in the wild. I haven't had a ton of success drawing up excitement within the friend group. Everybody seems to be generally very interested in the lore. Nobody's really checked out the books yet. There's been no modeling, no hobbying. They have come over to help me try to figure out the game. We've enjoyed doing some dice rolling. It's mostly some people from my D&D group, but we haven't taken it further than that. I am currently also trying to understand a bit more about playing 40k, about playing Necromunda Kill Team, as a whole. It's big. There's a lot of rules. It's kind of like D&D or other games where it's sort of like you just got to start doing it and you figure it out as you go. But they're vast games. They're complex, and it's been tough. If anybody watching this is interested in helping me to learn how to play 40k Kill Team, especially Necromunda, I've been very interested in hearing how that plays. I've been messing around with Tabletop Simulator, getting those models up and loaded, and the general table that everybody uses to play this stuff. I've learned just enough to know that I don't know enough to play, but I love the system. It makes it very easy overall to get some of this stuff rolling. Rolling dice. Jokes. But yeah, let me know. I've never actually played in that setting either, so I've sort of been intimidated by the whole concept that I'm not only learning this larger game of 40k, Kill Team, Necromunda, whichever one you happen to be trying that day, but I'm also learning how Tabletop Simulator works, and then beyond that, how those games in Tabletop Simulator have been set up by the community. So I'm learning sort of 3 things at once. It's a little intimidating, but I'm working on it. Anyways, if you've done it before, if you have interest in sharing, I would love to learn more. I'd love to be able to come to my friend group and be like, I know now. I have the knowledge. I've also been working on building out some significant terrain pieces. I think something that really excites me about 40k, and I'm hoping will excite my friend group, is seeing a really cool diorama playset of like, this is what we're going to be playing on today, that it really draws you into the setting. I only had, 6 to 7 pieces of broken terrain provided by my original box set before. So not enough to really draw in a setting, more just like, yes, there's some ruins. We can work around those. So I'm trying to make that a little bit more robust and more engaging, which is probably something I'll share at some point to kind of get there. But I've got all these ideas in my head, but man, they take a while. It can be... my brain moves faster than my fingers do. We'll say that. That's a weird way of saying that. Anyways, if you are interested in joining me in Tabletop Simulator, you've played before, and you're kind of, willing to struggle through me trying to figure stuff out, I am very new to this as a game, but I'd love to play it as a game. Feel free to reach out to me either here on YouTube or on Discord, whatever works for you, and we'll see if we can make that happen. For any of you that watch this and are now terrified, Warhammer's never replaced Final Fantasy XI for me. It's just something else that kind of tickles the same parts of my brain that Final Fantasy XI does. If you'd like to see more content about this stuff, more about the painting, modeling, books, hobbying, the other games, let me know in the comments. I'm really excited to maybe share a little bit more about this particular passion and where it's kind of brought me and the different things I've found going along. But I'm curious to see what you guys think. Otherwise, keep on the lookout for more videos like these, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.